So, welcome back to another channel, another episode here. I'm going to be doing another interview style podcast here. We're going to be going over some more topics that seem to be coming up, and they are pretty common topics. The reason I'm trying to do this is put out legitimate information from people that are in the field, that have the expertise, and you're not getting this information from bodybuilding.com forum and your neighbor that lives in a basement. You know, we're trying to create the best physique, the best health we can as efficiently as we can without all the extra hazards. I'm going to go ahead and introduce and let my guest for today give a little bit about herself, her background, and where she's coming from. She is my provider in terms of my TRT and my peptide use. I ended up meeting her through someone else, and after finally getting off my behind, pulled the trigger and kind of finally acted adult-ish. Been working with Katie here for been talking for maybe close to a month. I've actually started the TRT and the peptides here going into week 2. So Katie, go ahead and give a little bit backstory about yourself.
Yeah. So I'm Katie. I live currently right now in Florida. I've been in the healthcare field for, oh my God, I don't know, like since 2007-ish.
Okay.
I was a ICU nurse prior to going to get my advanced degree. I did all my training out east. So I went to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And worked at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, which is like the Mecca center of basically all of Penn medicine, and worked in the ICU there before going back home to Minnesota to do that and kind of start with getting their nurse practitioner program up and going. And then within the intensive care. So all of my background right now, and has been since I've been a nurse practitioner for around almost 6.5, 7 years now. All my background is in intensive care.
Mm-hmm.
So I work, at big academic centers, University of Minnesota Medical Center. I worked at the hospital, University of Pennsylvania Medical Center. I now do contracting work, and I've been really lucky to be at an amazing hospital in Pennsylvania that's also an academic medical center, Wellspring York Hospital. And then I also do Atlanta. So then I'm downtown Atlanta. So I've seen a little bit of everything, kind of through the years, but really started getting into this, kind of started to hear about it. I mean, I've been an athlete my whole life. I ran all through, college, and my, family's very active, and all my brothers played D1 sports. And so started hearing kind of about this stuff I would say really about 2.5 years ago.
Okay.
Became interested in it about a year ago, and then started actually doing the treatments in February or in January of 2022.
Okay.
So I've been about a year out now, but have done a ton of research because, again, I was super skeptical. Coming from academic centers, everything in medicine in my mind has been, research driven and academia and protocols and stuff like this. And this is the Wild West of medicine. And it is definitely something that we need to be aware of. Mm-hmm. But I think we also have to keep an open mind about. And I feel like in the medical community, it's been really tricky for people to do that. Medical community is not very robust to change their ideas.
Yeah.
They're pretty stuck in kind of how they are, because we are so evidence-based. And a lot of these topics, there's a ton of evidence like TRT. Okay, that's different. But as far as the peptides and that kind of stuff, it's really a game, kind of, like I said, the Wild West. And so people in the medical community, really traditional, medical providers kind of stray away from that.
Yeah.
So it's been very, very interesting to learn about it.
Yeah. And, I probably started hearing about peptides maybe about 2 years ago
Yep.
myself. I'm coming from the, bodybuilding kind
Yep.
of community. Also, uh, maybe about 7 years in the Army Special Forces. And so there's been a lot of talk about this topic, especially the TRT for service members, which
Yeah.
we'll get into that. But service members, especially at like higher
Huge.
at higher levels, man, they're just numbers
Yeah.
are wrecked, and a lot of people are having to go this route, just lifestyle and things like that. But I probably started hearing about peptides a couple of years ago and kind of questioned it. And I've been in, I've been taking supplements of, protein powders, pre-workouts, that kind of stuff. But even remember hearing about like pro hormones coming out. And I was like, that doesn't sound like a good idea. And sure enough, it wasn't. And then, everything that keeps coming out in the fitness community as a magic supplement, I've just gotten a little bit jaded about it because, everything pops out on the shelf. Sounds good, sounds great, almost too good to be true. Come to find out, it really is. So I kind of dealt with peptides in the same way. I've done a little research, definitely not academia, Pittsburgh, Minnesota, Atlanta level, but I've done just a little bit, and I'm coming along. And after talking to you, I was like, okay, I this is something I'm willing to give a shot to with. Side note, Pittsburgh, Minnesota, Atlanta, Florida.
Philadelphia, Philly.
And yeah.
Philly, not Pittsburgh. I didn't go to Pittsburgh. I went to Philly.
Man, like your body's got to be confused in terms of weather. Just weather. We can just talk about the weather change, but yeah, all over the place. But that probably gives you a lot of diversity in seeing different things, especially in the the ICU realm. But so let's go ahead and go over some basic stuff, because man, SARMs, I first heard about SARMs from my very first coach that I had. This was in it was before I came to Florida. I was in North Carolina. It was around 2013-ish, 2014. She, similar to you, she is a research-driven individual, like the coach, and she hands me a stack of paperwork. I kid you not, that thick, and she's like, SARMs, they're going to be the next big things. And I'm like, what the hell? Went through and I was like, okay, it sounds good. I never truly hopped on the bandwagon. I bought some and was like, whatever. I suck at taking supplements anyway, pills, and oh man. So, but I know here we are, fast forward, and I don't know if we've gotten any more clarity on SARMs from where it started at about 7-8 years ago to current. And I feel like the community as a whole has kind of, they've taken product that probably has a lot of good to it, and then they kind of watered it down. But I feel like that's kind of where we're at with SARMs. So just basic overview. What's your take on SARMs? Like, what are they, and just generally, what do you make of them?
Yeah. So I was saying this to you right away. Like, I'm not an expert on SARMs. So again, just this is like a very new thing. For the SARMs category is a very newer thing. But basically, if you want to think of SARMs, the selective androgen receptor modifiers. So basically what they do is they suppress, I'm trying to kind of dumb this down, but they basically suppress your gonadotropins, right? So your luteinizing hormones, all of those sex binding hormones, all of that. And when you start to mess around with those, and you drop your sex binding and all of these hormones, basically you've got little regulation of both your estrogen and your androgen receptors, which is important because people in the bodybuilding world are androgens, all of that stuff. But when you suppress those, your sex binding hormone is going to go down, which is going to increase the amount of free androgens basically that you have.
Yeah.
The real purpose and the real reason why SARMs outside of the bodybuilding world were kind of developed and discovered were actually people with like really severe muscle wasting diseases.
Yeah.
They started using them on those people to build, muscle and, help kind of promote them to get that muscle back and all that stuff. The biggest thing in the medical community that we're looking at is there's a marker called MK2866. And basically what they're looking at that for specifically right now is turning off those receptors. And if you can turn off those receptors, what you can do is in terms help prevent different kinds of things. So because it's going to work on an estrogen and an androgen receptor, you can modulate basically types of cancers with that. So prostate cancer is a big one for men, breast cancer for women. So a lot of studies are coming out about that. As far as the bodybuilding world, my biggest recommendation is, and this is something I don't currently prescribe because I don't feel that I am the right person because I'm not that knowledgeable in it, yet that I feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah.
But theoretically, they're going to make you feel awesome.
Yeah.
And you're going to feel great. You're going to feel amazing. You're going to gain muscle. You're going to lose body fat. You're going to have this rapid increase of, this basically excessive androgen production, which is what for men is going to build muscle and all that. But depending upon what SARM you get and what kind it is, where it's produced, what it's like laced with, it depends on where it's being broken down. Now, the majority of the SARMs are broken down. They're like troches. So you put them like buccal and they come in little squares. Like Anavar is like the biggest one. Oxandrolone, that's the other name for it. Those come in troches. And so because you're taking them that way, they have to digest somewhere and they're going to break down in the liver.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure that one, your product is good. Two, this is not something that you just go and you can continually take at all. Because if you do, you're going to see massive issues with, elevated liver enzymes. If you go through a reputable person, they should be getting pre-panel blood work and post-cycle blood work because your liver is going to take a hit. Yeah. And you have to really think about that because you only really get one liver.
Yeah, no.
In your life. And
you need that one.
Yeah. And then there's a whole other thing of, the blood pressure issues, all of that stuff that comes with these excessive androgens. You get different kinds of, side effects and everything like that. So as far as SARMs, if you're going to do it, make sure you go through a reputable person and somebody who is very knowledgeable in prescribing. And this is why I don't do it yet because I just don't feel like I'm there. They're also the good products are very costly. Yeah. So like example, like Empower Pharmacy is one of the pharmacies that I use, and they do have, Anavar, Oxandrolone. And depending upon how much you get and how much is in there, it can be extremely pricey. Like we're talking $800-900, for the cycle. So if you're seeing it, it's probably too good to be true. If you're seeing something that's really cheap, just pay attention to that. That would be just kind of my word of caution on it.
And that part's really huge because we're at the part. There's I live close to a supplement store, and you can go in there and find a SARM stack, if you will, and it might be $100 or whatever for vial, but it it should be about a 1 month
Yeah.
supply, and it'll
Yeah.
supposedly have 4 or 5 different SARMs in there, and it's like it's probably not legit because of the
Yeah.
cost. And I like what you said as far as being knowledgeable, because being knowledgeable, unfortunately, right now is usually like, I've heard of the product, I know what I
Yeah.
hope to get from it. There could be some side effects, and that is,
Yeah.
that's what people are saying is
Yeah.
their that's who they're going to for their information.
Yeah.
Where's the medical information behind that? Because, like you said, the SARMs world has a like I said, a good history behind it. That's exactly what you had mentioned in terms of bedridden patients. That was the one point that I remember my original coach, she kept harping, and she's like, "This is what it's used for. It helps
Yeah.
to keep from muscle wasting away in bedridden patients."
Yeah.
She had mentioned the cancer treatments and everything. Um, and so it sounds great, but even then, she was like, it's still on the new side.
Yes.
And even now, it's been about close to 10 years. That's still relatively new, because I mean, what do we know that happens 15 years later or
Yeah.
20
Yeah.
years down the road to the
Yeah.
body?
And I do
Um,
think that so much, there's so many good things with SARMs. I don't want to like sit here and harp on it and be like, oh,
yep.
they're, don't,
Yeah.
there are really, really good benefits for them. They work really well for very specific purposes for a very limited period of time, a 6-week cycle, 4 6-week cycle, and they work really well. But you've got to make sure that you spend the money, you go to somebody. And the other thing is like, your provider has to know their limitations. I know that my limitation is I just don't feel confident yet in myself to be able to prescribe this to patients, because I don't feel comfortable, because we don't have that information. I don't know, how they're going to take it. Are they going to abuse it? And then, that whole like aspect too is like, you have to trust your patients with this and stuff like that. So there is going to be really, really good,
Yeah.
literature coming out about SARMs and really, really amazing things that they're doing with them, for not only true medical issues, but for specific physique and bodybuilding and stuff. But you just have to really think about what you're doing. Make sure that you go to someone who knows what they're doing and can trial and error with you too, side effects, stuff like that. Because I do think that that's really huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And I completely agree. Yes, I truly believe that if you're getting a legitimate product, and that's the
Yeah.
first point, is just getting a legitimate product. Because, I mean, again, it's at the point where they're at most supplement
Yeah.
stores, but it's not actually been approved. As far as I remember, it's not been approved by the FDA. So it's not actually available for human consumption from a store. Now, you can, through prescription or medical treatment, yes, but with that is knowing you're probably getting some watered down stuff.
Yeah.
I try to tell a lot of my clients that I have, like, look, if you think about the supplement world as almost a legalized drug dealer,
Yeah.
where a great product will truly come along, and in order to get a little bit more money out of the same volume of stuff, you start adding a few extra things in there to expand your supplement. So, like, being very careful about
Yeah.
where you're getting your stuff from.
Yeah.
Um, and the MK2866 is, for most people, they'll know it as the name Ostarine. And so that is a very, very popular one right now,
Mhm.
along with, like, what is it, MK677 and
Yeah.
Rad 140 and
140.
those. Yep.
Yeah.
And like you said, great benefits. We're still questioning a few things.
Yes. And they're not bad if you take them regulated and you make sure that you go through a good source and you take off breaks.
Yeah.
I don't want to sit here and bash them. And there are such amazing people who are super knowledgeable about it. And you just have to find that, make sure they're using, a good reputable source, to get it from a legitimate, compounding, pharmacy, not some product that comes to you from Mexico. We don't know,
Yeah.
because those are the problem. And in ICU side of things, I've seen the other side of it. And
Yeah.
that's kind of why I started getting interested in this kind of world, because one, traditional medicine, is one thing, but two, we started seeing a lot of people that are really messed up
Yeah.
from really bad stuff. And I mean, like young people, and like liver transplants, liver failure, things like that. And we can kind of get into more about that stuff and everything later. But yeah, I think that is really definitely something, and there's going to be good things coming. Then they're really close to, like, I think the FDA is actually pretty close to pushing some of this stuff through, but obviously for specific purposes.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's good. Especially on the medical side, we'll step away from the fitness world. For the medical side, man, that's great, because there are legitimate cases where a person is needing something and it's beneficial for them.
Yeah.
And then when you bring it back to the fitness world, hopefully with the approval comes with it better quality product that's on the shelves for people to take. Also more knowledge about, dosage and frequency and how often to take and things like that. Because, I'll talk to some of the young guys at the gym, and they live on SARMs. They're not taking a break. And it's like, well, this stuff's got to get processed through the body some kind of way. Have you done any blood work? And most of them are like, nah. Blood work. Where do I get that from?
And it's not even the actual SARMs themselves; it's the fillers that's
correct
in there. That's the
Extra
other
stuff.
part. Is like, real SARMs, like that you get, Anavar, all that stuff. And if it's legit, like, yeah, there's risks with that, but you're going to be monitored and all of that stuff. But it's the stuff that we don't know that's in it, and we don't know what's concocted in it, and that is the stuff that I have seen.
Yeah. What horror story do you have with ICU from SARMs? I know you got one.
I've got there's a couple of them. And being at the academic centers, most of them are on college campuses.
Oh, yeah.
So you see that, a lot of it would cycle. Like, we started seeing cycles of it, during off season, where the guys aren't going to be tested as much either. We have gotten a couple, kind of like, hey, what do you think about this? I know that there's been like a couple of my friends who work in primary care, and they get labs back on someone, and they'll be like,
what are you doing?
Why is their HDL like non-existent? And I'm like, well, so, but yeah, I mean, as far as horror stories are basically, the couple, that I mean, there's a couple of them, but the biggest overwhelming factor is, the 20-year-old guy, super in shape, super fit, lifelong athlete, all of a sudden comes in, he's fatigue, says that he kind of has been itching, that kind of stuff. And, they do basic blood work. They think, oh yeah, he's just like got the flu or something, or he's really confused, or sometimes they're really combative. It really depends, like, on kind of what they're taking and how it is. There's a couple different stories of this, but just to kind of paint the picture, those are the couple things. They're really tired. One's kind of confused, kind of out of it. Most of them are really itchy, because when your liver breaks down, it produces a byproduct called bilirubin, and bilirubin can make you itch. So that's what bilirubin, when people like see yellow, when you get yellow eyes, yellow skin, that's bilirubin, and that's breakdown. And anyway, liver was like off the chart. And the worst thing about it is like when your liver fails, you get this triad of things that happen, encephalopathy, which is basically where you get really kind of confused. You get a slowing down of the brain. You get coagulopathies because your liver controls all your blood clotting and how you produce all that stuff. So you get really bad, thin blood. You can get what's called BIC, which is like a thickening and clotting and inappropriate coagulation of your blood, which you clot and bleed, and then you throw clots everywhere, and it's awful. And you go down this, rabbit hole, and you get blood pressure issues, all this stuff. So they end up in the ICU eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And the liver does not. I mean, there's things that you can do to help, get rid of those toxins that your liver's not, filtering. But at the end of the day, you can't really stop that process. You can kind of suppress it and help it, but your body's going to need time. And depending upon how severe the damage is and everything, you can't do there's talk about a liver dialysis. Yes, I think there has been some centers that have done it, but it's a temporary thing. The majority of them are going to go for a liver transplant. And liver transplant is, organ transplant is something that you can't take lightly, obviously. I think a lot of people are like, oh, okay, well, I'll just get a new liver. Well, no, because it comes with, immunosuppression. It comes with all this other stuff that you do. So those are the worst stories that I've seen. It causes massive organ failure throughout. I mean, that was like the most skim the basic top of what happens. But I mean, I can vividly remember at least 4 or 5 of them that I've seen, where sometimes you're too sick and you can't get a liver. So it totally just depends on, the person and everything. But those would be like the horror stories, because
organ transplant, that is a life altering event. It's not just I'm going to lay down, get knocked out, have the surgery, be up and running 6 to 8 weeks back to the gym. No, legitimately a life changing event, because you're at the least you're going to be on meds to make sure that the organ is stays compatible with you. At the very least, if not, it's going to be more intense. Like your entire life is going to be affected potentially from use of some crappy product. And when I say crappy, I don't mean SARMs. I mean low quality stuff that's on the market just to get some dollar bills. So like SARMs, like we've kind of said, it has a lot of value to it, but where we're at in the regulation of it and the administration, even just the knowledge of it, man, this is one of those, be very, very diligent about who you're talking to get your information and where you're getting it from, at the very least, and take your time. Like most supplements, more does not mean better. So, if your dose is, 1 serving a day, 2 servings doesn't, cut that time in half. That's not how the body math works. No. But that's crazy that, just go into a store, buy something, and, obviously it's going to take some time, but at some point ending up waking up on the ICU table, looking up at you going like, I'm supposed to be at the gym. Like, yo, who are you?
Well, the good thing is that you're so out of it that they probably don't remember seeing.
And hey, you got hospital food, right? Depending on the hospital you go to, it might be a good thing. I don't know. But definitely man, SARMs, I want them to be good so bad.
It will be. I really truly think they will be, and we're going to get there. But again, and there are really good ones. You have a really good purpose and a really good reason for using them, but you have to, also find somebody who provider wise is cognizant of that too, because yeah, we want our patients to feel good. Like, I want you to feel good. I want you to, gain all this muscle and do all this stuff, but we have to do it appropriately and we
Correct.
have to do it safely.
Correct. Correct. And before we move on to peptides, just want to say, like, if you were to go on to, if you're one of those people that you're following a bodybuilding channel of some sort, and they happen to mention their PED usage and SARMs comes up, understand that at a certain level, these bodybuilders, they're not going to their local supplement store to get whatever
Yeah.
they're taking. They're
Right.
getting it from a legitimate source, and that's
Yeah.
why their concern about taking things is a little bit lower
Yeah.
than what most people are. They're they've taken the precaution. They're spending the money for a quality product.
Yeah.
Whereas, us mere mortals who just want to get, bigger shoulders or something, we're going down the street and talking to Bob.
Yeah. And Chris, my question for you guys is bodybuilding community is, do you guys see more of an issue with this in kind of the amateur area versus like the professional, or is it kind of across the board?
So I would say my perspective is yes, at the amateur level,
Okay.
because like I said, there's a certain point, and when I say amateur, I mean probably more so with people who haven't gotten on stage at all. The biggest
Okay.
concern is the people that don't have a coach for guidance, and they're usually like really really early in their bodybuilding experience. Even if they're never planning on getting
Okay.
on stage, those are the ones where I'm going to do this because I heard my favorite bodybuilder takes this, so I'm going to do it. Whereas as you kind of mature in the bodybuilding world, as you get better, just like any other athlete, you
Hmm.
start to realize like, okay, I'm gonna have to spend the time to get better. I played basketball, so I knew I couldn't just find a quick fix to be a better free throw shooter. I had
Yeah.
to go and shoot the free throws.
Yeah.
So as you get a little bit further in your bodybuilding journey, you realize it's probably not the supplements that you're having to work so much on. You end up going back foundational, where it's like
Yeah.
I need to perfect my gym sessions. I need to perfect my sleep and nutrition, and those things get more and more like the center focus as you're progressing. So at a
Yeah.
certain point, I believe that fear drops, and then also, sorry, not fear, but the concern drops. And then also, as you just get a little bit further in your journey, you start moving away from the easy to get stuff and moving a little bit more to the hard hitting, tried and true,
Yeah.
world of PEDs. I'm really excited about talking about is peptides.
Yes.
So, like I said, I started on the peptides through you. The first peptide that I remember hearing about specifically was it was like the Wolverine peptide. That's not the official name. I still didn't even find the official name for it, but I remember
Okay.
hearing this, and it was like it helped recovery and repair of the tissue, and I'm just like, that's crazy. And
Yeah.
Wolverine's a high standard. I don't know if you
Yeah.
you did the comic book world, but Wolverine, man, you couldn't destroy him. So like to put that name on this compound, I was like, okay, cool. And I just started listening and reading some more stuff. But so I've started taking through you the CJC 1295.
Yep.
And so we're at, I don't know, this might actually, what is this, Wednesday? So this evening will be day 8 of my use of it. I'm taking it 5 times a week. And like you had recommended at nighttime, and it
Yeah.
has been helping with sleep. But let's go ahead and just with the basics of peptides.
Yeah.
What are peptides?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's basically exactly what I was just going to start with is like, what is a peptide? Because when I started hearing about these a couple of years ago, I was like, what is this? Like, what is a peptide? Because there are tons of peptides in your body, and we taught that and everything like that. So peptides are basically short chains of a sequence of different types of amino acids.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the peptides, not all of them, but a lot of them are already derivatives. So they're part of basically products that's already occurring in your body, a lot of hormones and kind of things like that. So they're different than proteins. Proteins, I believe, are about 100 or more different kind of chains or whatever. And so these are a shorter chains. There are so many functions of them. They can help there's tons of data right now pouring into how they can help your immune system, especially now with like the COVID-19 pandemic, all that stuff that was going on. There are really big studies going on about how that can, help produce and kind of boost your immune system, I guess, to say it easily. It helps with your skin, your hair. There's tons of weight loss kind of things that are going into these. And then obviously growth hormones and all of the endocrine stuff. So that's kind of a peptide, basically a chain of amino acids that do a ton of different things.
Okay, cool. And that's essentially what I heard. And so just to put it like this, because I know anytime we hear about some kind of product that is supposedly helping build muscle faster than normal or anything, some people go way extreme. It's like, it's a steroid. And it's like, well, no, this is essentially like a synthetic version of chains that are actually happening in the body. Now I'm gonna be selfish because I want to talk about the CJC. So that one in particular, what is that one? CJC1295.
Yeah. So before we get into that, I'm going to break it down too. There's two groups. So you have to look at, there's a couple different categories of these. So the CJC1295 that you hear about, the Semare, ipamorelin, tesamorelin, those are all in a specific category that are called GHRH. So they're growth hormone releasing analogs. So they're releasing hormones, but they're analogs. So basically what that means is it's going to work with your pituitary, which is it's really about a pea size. It's super tiny and it's in the back of your brain. That is what is going to control your pituitary, is what controls your endocrine functioning, your growth, your development, all of that stuff. So what these GHRH, these growth hormone releasing hormones do is they augment your pituitary. They don't shut down your pituitary, because and there's another category that sort of does, and we'll get into that, but they augment it. So they basically communicate with your pituitary, say, hey, you should produce more of this stuff, more of this growth hormone, more of that kind of thing. And the original one in that category, like the very beginning, that has had tons and tons and tons of studies, that was used and is used in the clinical setting for clinical, growth hormone deficiency, is Semare. So Semare and ipamorelin are similar. Ipamorelin combined with the CJC1295, you are going to get, you're hitting kind of two different receptors kind of at the same time. So people like the CJC1295 and the ipamorelin, basically because it is longer acting, it's stronger, you get faster results. There's anti-aging properties with CJC1295. There's a ton of sleep properties with CJC1295. And so that's why they'll combine them. So when I talk to patients about, hey, they're like, oh, I'm, interested in doing something kind of a little bit more natural, we talk about the GHRH, medication list, because those are going to augment your production. It's not just going to like shut it off. So that's why I like those. Now, Semarelin is originally what was used in the hospital, like I said before. So we do have a ton of studies on that. That is something that's very highly studied. That is something that we know. And so if you kind of want to maintain, sometimes I'll say, okay, let's do Semarelin. You're not really looking for like, boom, I want a big boost. I want to gain mass, all of this stuff. Then we talk more about the Semarelin. But the CJC1295 with the ipamorelin is technically your strongest. So like in your perspective, being, in the bodybuilding industry and stuff like that, and this is your first time doing it, let's try this. But again, you have to cycle off of it. So the data with the cycling off of it isn't super robust yet about it. There's a lot of talk about, well, should it be, 6, 8, or 12 weeks in total? And then how long should you go off of it, or how long should you not? So that's still kind of like up and coming, and that's kind of trending about what you should do with that. But usually what I recommend is it's subcutaneous. You do it 5 times a week at night, because at night is when your body kind of resets and does all that growth hormone and all of that. That's when your body's natural production happens. So we do it at night. Plus then you've got the CJC1295. So you've got the properties of sleep and all of that stuff as well. And then after about, usually I say 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, we talk about it. And then I have you go off for around 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
Again, it's not like a perfect science yet, but that's kind of what more and more people are recommending.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of why we do that. There's also recommendations. Well, if I go off of it, can I switch to another peptide? It's kind of a gray area, but especially for bodybuilders, because you have a specific season, or you want to plan for a specific show, or you want to do whatever, we can kind of do that.
Yeah.
And then you asked me a really good question that actually a lot of people don't ask, which was interesting. You asked me about labs.
Mhm.
So a lot of people don't ask about the lab part. So what I usually do for my patients is, I don't feel necessarily the huge need to, if you've never been on it before. So in your case, you're okay if I kind of use you as an example.
Yeah.
Okay. So in your case, you'd never been on it before. So technically your IGF levels, which are going to tell us what your growth hormone kind of factors are, they should be relatively normal. So I don't want to, have you spend the money to get that. I would rather check them at the end of your cycle to make sure, because we really truly like that range between, there's a lot of variation, again, because you have to take into account age. And as you age, your growth hormone is going to go down, obviously. So we have to take all that into account. But ideally around 100 to 275 is where I like it. And so I do think at the end of your cycle, then I will get labs and I'll check, your growth hormone, your factors a little bit more, just to kind of see where you are at and how you respond.
I've just learned over the past couple of years, like that's a big thing for me, just making sure that whatever I'm putting on body, I'm aware of the changes that are happening, because, I'd also, around 2020-ish, 2021 is when I started realizing, hey, I need to get TRT, prior service, hitting the head enough times, pituitary gland damaged. And so my numbers had dropped. And at that point is when I got really big about like, okay, I'm not just going to be doing some randomness. I need things to be precise, and not for the bodybuilding aspect, but for health. Because here's the truth. And this is something I hope and wish a lot of bodybuilders understand, is there still has to be a life after bodybuilding. sure, it might sound glorious and everything to step on stage, be the best, and you're Mr. Olympia and everything. But if you don't have a life after that, then really, what was the purpose? And that's kind of how I look at it. I needed to know that, my hobby of bodybuilding wasn't going to somehow negatively impact my life. And so
Yeah.
that's why I was concerned about the lab work. Another thing that you had pointed out was how it augments or it works with the pituitary gland. And put it this way, like when you're taking other PEDs, it is a synthetic form of those hormones. And so the body's going to, the basic version, it sees those things and senses a higher than normal level of those hormones, and the body will try to regulate, and it will stop the production of your hormones. And so that's the difference between some of these other PEDs and the peptides, or one of the differences, and the value of it is that it works with you and not against you, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, even with when you were explaining it, and I started thinking about it and realizing, taking the CJC at nighttime because it helps with sleep, but also, I'm real big about yelling at my clients about, hey, make sure you're getting sleep, because that's where all the repair happens. But even the hormone production, that's where all of that stuff starts to get reset and getting back to normal level, because over the day, stress and everything's kind of wearing you down. Your sleep is supposed to be that time where you go back to your balance, where you start off where you're supposed to be at. And so, it just plays with that. So I know personally, it's been 8 days of taking it. So 8 injections. So I don't know, maybe close to 2 weeks here. I have noticed sleep has gotten a little bit better. I do wear the Whoop 4.0 or whatever version it's on right now, but I like it. I keep a track of a log of my sleep habits and stuff. And when I am sleeping well, not because I'm being stupid, like staying up watching or doing something ridiculous, probably eating because I'm a fat kid trapped in this body, and I'm fighting free to get out. But somewhere around like 11:30, I'm not gonna lie, I'm sitting there eating Waffle House or something because you're in the South, you got to, right? But once I finally do get off my behind and go to bed, my sleep efficiency, that's one of the scores that does get tracked. My sleep efficiency has gone up a lot. Like a low number for me right now has been about 83% efficiency, meaning how long I've been laying down versus how long I've actually been asleep, and the me going through those phases. So I've noticed that those numbers have gone up. And this morning I was at 90, I think it was 94% efficiency. So in other words, I hit the bed and I was done, and then woke up. And so I at least at this point, I'm seeing that. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of proper sleep cycle and habits, because you can do a lot of work at the gym and you can eat all the right foods, but if you're not sleeping well, you're shooting yourself in the foot, and probably shooting yourself in both feet, if anything. So the sleep is huge. So the CJC1295, it is a, how would you describe, like, it's a growth hormone, you said growth hormone RA.
So there's a couple things that I want to touch on about your, like, being hungry too. So this is a growth hormone releasing hormone. So it's a synergistic thing between your pituitary and you're getting a little something to basically give the oomph to your pituitary to be like, hey, pump out more of this. That's basically what you're doing with that. There's another group, though, that's called GHRP. So it's growth hormone releasing peptides. And you are getting, with the CJC1295 ipamorelin combination, you're hitting on both of those receptors. So we talked about how that that's a stronger one because you're hitting both receptors. So one that literally is just kind of a one receptor, if you want to try to break it down, I'm trying to make this as less complicated as I can so people can try to understand this.
No.
So one receptor is something called MK677 or ibutamoren. That one is going to hit you kind of on one receptor. So basically, in this world, and the scientists and the pharmacists got smart and they were like, hey, if we can combine both of these together, can we get maximum benefit? Meaning that synergistic kind of benefit. So that's where these CJC1295, abpamorelin, sabamorelin, all of that stuff kind of came into play. So as far as like ibutamoren or MK677, those ones are going to hit your ghrelin receptor. Okay. So ghrelin is the hunger hormone.
Hunger. Yeah.
Hunger
That's
hormone,
my friend.
hunger, yeah, it makes you hungry. And so you have that. I mean, like, that's what you said, you're hungry all the time and stuff. So you're getting that component of it too. But if you, the downside about these GHRPs is that if you just work on hitting that one, you're going to get the negative side effects with that. So that's why they tried to augment these together and come up with the combinations of these things. Gotcha. So if you think about, and ghrelin is really important because it does a whole bunch of things that other than, make you hungry. I always think of ghrelin like grr, like your stomach's growling, because that's signals to your brain, like, yeah, I'm hungry. So ghrelin plays a whole role in hunger, anxiety, insulin production, all of that stuff. So people that take MK677 or ibutamoren, their biggest complaint when they take those are, I feel anxious, I feel hangry, I feel jittery, I feel sweaty, I just feel awful. And yeah, you're going to build more kind of muscle mass, but you're not going to get the benefit of kind of hitting both of those receptors to kind of counteract each other. So that's why I tend to like the CJC1295 abpamorelin. Now, sure, you can take MK677 with it, like you can do both. But personally, I just think, I don't know. Again, everybody's different, but I personally am like, hey, if before we start adding more and more things, I don't want to waste your money and I don't really know what the benefit would be. The other thing that I'm not a super big fan of is when you do ipamorelin and semarelin. To me, there's a combo of that. And to me, I prefer to kind of have them separate. It's kind of like too much. There's been, especially in men in their like late 30s and 40s, they can actually gain weight, but they gain weight in their abdominal section. Yeah. So they actually can put on weight because your body's like so off and it's producing too much and it's kind of confused. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, I took this stuff to like lose body fat and gain mass, and I'm gaining mass, but I'm really not losing fat. And like, so it's too much. And I'm a little bit just more conservative. That's kind of, my approach is not like super, I just don't want to keep throwing things at people because I can do that and you can pay for it. But I'm not, how much benefit can we get? If we're hitting the same receptor, how many different times? Like, so.
Exactly. And that was one thing that I did appreciate when we had spoke about the peptides was you had mentioned the peptides that you do work with, and we had come to the conclusion of let's try one peptide at a time and see how you do on that.
Yeah.
Because the
growth hormone peptides. Yeah.
Sure. I could have hopped on multiple different things.
Oh yeah.
But what I wouldn't have been able to place which one did what and which one worked. And maybe one of them didn't do anything for me, but I wouldn't have been able to tell out of three, or, we couldn't have
Yeah.
come to a good conclusion. I think this is something that also a lot of, especially younger people, but they get into this, well, if this does good and this does good and this does
Yeah.
good, well, let's just take them all.
Mm.
And you don't know, you can't go through an
Yeah.
actual like scientific process of figuring anything out
What
because you
works,
have
what
too many
doesn't.
variables.
Absolutely. And I think I told you that too. I'm like, I want to know, like, if you're experiencing a negative side effect, I want to know what it's from, like, because then we're just kind of like, well, let's try this one, let's pull this one off, let's buy that. And then it's too much. And then to me, it's like, I'm not helping you at all, and then we're trying to play catch up, trying to figure out what's going on. And there are specific purposes where you would do that. Obviously, like if you had a specific thing, like this is my goal, this is what I want, like, yeah, we can do that. But in your case, it was like, hey, this is my first time. And I was like, okay, yeah, let's just, see how your body reacts to this, see how you feel on it, and kind of go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like taking that approach, even just with foods or workouts or anything like that, because this same exact thing can happen. What is it? When you're trying to figure out like food sensitivities,
Yeah.
that test, you just go straight
Yeah.
bland, and all you do is you add one thing and see what happens.
Yeah.
That mentality is very helpful.
Yeah.
You know, especially if you're looking for precision, which a lot of the bodybuilding world is about being as precise and efficient as possible. And so it might suck because you're going to have to go through a cycle of this one, and then you got to go through a cycle of another one, and then a cycle of something else. That's three cycles when, sure, maybe you could have just thrown them all into one syringe and just done them all in one cycle, but you
Yeah.
don't have a lot of data to pull from. You took
Absolutely.
those three things, and you know what your before and after pictures and weight was, and
Yeah.
hope for the best.
Yeah.
Jesus, take the wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
oh, go ahead, Chris.
no. Go ahead.
And so, there's a lot more, there's other peptides, and everything that we'll get into, but I do want to, say and caution this is, because I am very like scientific and evidence-based and all of this stuff, that I think it's important that one, we state that, these are not FDA approved,
Mhm.
that these are definitely things that we are still learning about. There have been really encouraging and hopeful studies with really good data, but the volume of people are low. Most of these studies have been done in animals, in like rats and stuff,
Yeah.
which it's encouraging, but it's not a human.
Yeah.
But the other thing, and the biggest risk for peptides, because nothing, of course, nothing comes without risks, but the biggest risk for these peptides, and, when I meet patients, I always ask them, tell me, like, it's important. You got to get a full medical history, all of this stuff, because with any sort of manipulation of any sort of growth hormone, you are basically kind of giving your body free rein to do something. And it might be supplying growth hormone to something you don't want to grow.
Yeah.
So any sort of history of tumor, benign or malignant, it
Mhm.
doesn't matter. You are absolutely, in my eyes, as not a candidate. And I think if you ever go to any responsible provider would say that. I mean, that's pretty much across the board.
Yeah.
The other thing is, because because it works on those ghrelin receptors,
Yeah.
ghrelin suppresses your insulin production. So you are more at risk for becoming hyperglycemic. So you can get, diabetes,
Yeah.
type 2 diabetes, and develop an insulin resistance. So that is something to definitely, pay attention to.
Yeah.
The reason why we cycle off too is to, basic, and everybody does it different. That's the other thing. No provider really kind of does it the same, but I like to cycle off because I think it's important that you just give yourself, a break. Now you're augmenting your growth hormone. You're not like shutting it off. It's not,
Yep.
it's different than testosterone, but, because I do feel like you need to kind of give your body like that reset. And so that is definitely something to continually think about when you're on these two.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I definitely agree. One, like you said, nothing comes without risk. Everything is a risk reward, and you have to weigh the differences. And getting the more information allows you to be more responsible in that decision making process. Really important to understand, like you said, growth hormone doesn't just. It's not like you take this and your body's like, oh, I have growth hormone. He's lifting weights, so he clearly just wants to get bigger muscles. No, it grows everything.
Anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it will
Everything.
grow, and it could be muscle, it could be, and understanding like your organs are a muscle. So like, heart can grow because of that, and the tumors, and then also being aware of your chances of, or your risk factors for diabetes, which is massive considering it's like 40 something percent of American population is some form of diabetic,
Yeah.
whether
Insulin
undiagnosed,
resistance. Yeah.
pre-diabetic, type 1 or type 2. So you
Yeah.
definitely being aware of that is critically important. Any responsible provider would give you these kinds of parameters. That goes with coaches too. So, you can shop around and find a coach that will just throw a bunch of, chemicals and compounds at you for the sake of, saying, hey, I have this client with this crazy before and after picture, but they're not responsible. And I will say you should not work with, any coach that is not asking for blood work. Um, I personally do not tell my clients PED suggestions. I'm not qualified. I will direct them to somebody that I trust, but I always tell them, hey, blood work. And I also ask them to do the HIPAA release so that I can see that and I can look at their blood work. But I wish that as that people as consumers understood that part too. It's like, look, just because somebody let some words fly out their mouth doesn't make it valid, and nor does it mean you need to follow it. Be wary. Was there anything else that you wanted to point out about the CJC 1295?
I don't think so. I think we pretty much covered the two different, kind of big groups. And I did want to, we spoke on the ibuprofen as well, because that kind of combines in there, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
What do you have, I guess, questions, Chris, or like anything else before we move on to like some other really kind of cool peptides?
So I know that probably a lot of my questions will not have answers because of the lack of data. But I know questions that would come up about that would be like, what kind of results could a person be expecting on something like this? Because it's one thing to say, hey, increase, growth hormone or increase whatever, and that'll lead to muscle gain. But what does that mean? Am I looking at a pound of muscle a month, a week, a year? So any idea, like, even if it's anecdotal from some of other people that maybe you've worked with, what should people, or could people expect from this compound?
So that's a great question. And everybody, I really wish I could say like, oh, you're going to gain 2 pounds a week or something. There's different ways you have to look at it. There's mass gain, and then there's body composition. So mass gain is easy because you can be like, oh yeah, like I gained this amount of weight, all this stuff. But then you've got body composition. Well, okay, I've gained weight, but what's my body fat percentage? Or what, how does my physique look? How does my recovery? So it's really hard to give you specific data on that. But I will say, kind of in a general statement, the first 4 weeks, I usually say really you'll start to notice around 6 weeks. But in the first four, even 2 to 4 weeks, you really should notice your sleep and recovery. That is should be kind of what when you hit on that too, like, hey, I feel like my sleep has gotten a little better, my recovery got, a little bit better. Those are what you kind of would expect to see.
Yep.
Then the second, second cycle, so it's like your first cycle or your the second half of your cycle, you should start to see more of those composition things. You should start to see a little bit more of that muscle, that gain, the increase in strength. You'll see, oh, hey, I'm benching more today, or hey, I'm squatting more, this month than I did last month, but my recovery is better and I can keep pushing myself. You should start to see that in that second chunk. So in that second four weeks, you should start to see that. And then body composition, and you're way better, at that than I am in taking those measurements and doing all of those, because, that takes your trainers and your coaches and all that stuff. They, are gonna be the ones that do that. But to track that, you should see that your body fat percentage is going down because you're increasing your lean muscle mass. And so those are kind of things that you would expect to see.
Gotcha. And so, I have one of those scales that, it tries to collect some of that data. So I did do one at the beginning of the cycle, and I'll probably do a couple just periodically. So I'm interested in seeing that, because I did expect kind of what you were saying, and it's I feel like most supplements just in general work similar, where it affects something non-tangible, which then turns into something that you can see and understand. Your recovery got better. Now you were able to push a little bit more weight at the gym, which led to more lean body mass, not just I, stuck a needle in my leg or something and I just blew up. So that was another reason with, getting a little bit better with tracking even my sleep with this Whoop, because I'm curious to see where those metrics are throughout the process and what I could see. So I'm expecting it'll be fun. Either way, it'll be fun for me. Anything that improves my sleep or recovery, I'm game. I think that's the magic part. A lot of people I think underrate those two parts of life, sleep and recovery. But like I said before, you can crush yourself at the gym, have the most epic leg day ever. But if it took you, over a week to recover, you're at that point you're surviving and you're not thriving.
And it's important to point out too with the CJC, because you're hitting both of those receptors. You're going to get that recovery. You're going to get the sleep. You're going to get all that stuff within the ipamorelin and semarelin. You're going to get all of that. Whereas, like, if you take MK677, diabetomorin, you're going to see, like, what you would expect to see is just strictly mass. You're going to see mass. You're not going to see as much of you'll see composition because you're, getting mass, but you're not going to see kind of like the increase, maybe as much of like the lean mass and kind of the whole benefit of, your recovery. You're not going to get that as much, which is why more people, and why I personally like the combo, because I feel like if you're going to stick yourself, like, and do that, but, you might as well. So it's interesting to say, like, for your listeners that want to do just one or the other and kind of are trying to decide which one, that's something to think about too.
Okay. I do have a quick question. So the CJC1295 is a subcutaneous. Why is it subcutaneous as opposed to being IM or intramuscular?
Yeah, so it's basically, that's a great question. So the sub-Q, I think technically there are oral forms
Mm,
of it, but basically if you take something orally, you're going to have to break it down. It's going to have to go through, it's going to have to be broken down through everything. So the most quickest and most bioavailability way to get it into your body is to
mhm.
do it subcutaneous, have it
Okay.
sit in those tissues and kind of absorb over time
Mm,
rather than, have it digest through,
yep,
because what goes in your mouth has to come out. So you've got to go
yep.
through the whole process. And so that's why they find, there's better results doing it that way.
Gotcha. Okay, cool, cool. Yeah, because that makes sense. Because if it's got to go through the moment it hits your mouth, it starts to get
Yeah.
broken down.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine I would even lower its efficacy to
Yeah.
some degree.
Yeah. It
You
would. And that's the
know,
biggest thing. Yeah.
so essentially, like doing the sub Q, what you put in, you are going to get a higher percentage of that, as opposed to once it goes through your mouth and your system, maybe just random numbers, but maybe you don't get 100% of it. Maybe you get 80 or
Yeah.
70% because it got broken down.
Yeah.
Does that
And
sound
I don't even know. I don't, like the pharmacy we use, they don't offer it, I don't think orally.
okay?
But I think it does come potentially in oral form.
Hmm.
Um, don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that it does.
Okay.
But I just don't, that's something that I don't,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And for anybody listening, so I'm one of those people. I'm like, nah, I pass on needles. Like, like even the subcutaneous ones are not bad, but they are using the insulin needles, so they're super small. You hardly feel those ones. So if you are not the biggest fans of sticking yourself, it is very manageable. Take it from me. Look, the army traumatized me. I have PTSD from, I had to get a smallpox shot in
All
my.
your vaccines, yeah.
Oh my gosh. The smallpox one, I will never, it was right before my first deployment. And I think they're supposed to stick you like 13 or 14 times, but it's supposed to be in a very small circle or area. And they're like, it'll scar, it'll turn into a scab or wound and then scars up. Don't mess with it. And the lady's sitting there, she's going, and she starts to slow down, and she finally stops and goes, I'm sorry, I lost count. I near lost it. But so let's talk about Ozempic.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that, because I know that is, man, that took over. Like, I don't know if you can't go anywhere without hearing about Ozempic. Ozempic, does that fall into the peptide world?
Yes. So
Okay.
Ozempic is also a peptide. It is a GLP inhibitor. So it's kind of interesting because Ozempic was, well, it is formally FDA approved, but basically for diabetes. So the drug was invented for patients with type 2 diabetes. When they were doing the studies on the drug and everything, they started realizing, like, oh my God, all these people are losing weight.
Yeah.
Um, and it acts on that ghrelin receptor that we were kind of, talking about, but they modulated it to suppress your appetite, by acting on the ghrelin receptor, but without increasing your insulin. So they were
Mhm.
kind of able to formulate it like that. And then the other thing that they noticed is, holy cow, like people are, their insulin, or their blood glucose is improving, but they're all saying across the board that they don't have an appetite. And then all of them started losing
Gotcha.
weight, which in
Yeah.
terms, if you're a type 2 diabetic, most type 2, not all, but a
Yeah.
lot of them are a little bit on the more heavy
Okay.
side.
Yep.
And so they started, really kind of correlating to that. Then with them losing weight, what happened? Well, their cholesterol numbers improved, their
Yep.
blood pressure improved, all
Yeah.
of these things. So it was really this kind of cascade that happened.
Hmm.
So the thing about Ozempic is I do tons and tons and tons with the weight loss. So there's a couple ways you have to think about it. So Ozempic is the brand name.
Hmm.
The generic name is semaglutide.
Hmm.
So Ozempic is patented. So Ozempic is patented, meaning that I cannot go tell people that I can give them Ozempic because only patients with a hemoglobin A1C of around 6.6 to 6.8, it's different in some states,
Hmm.
can get Ozempic and have it covered by their insurance.
Insurance. Yeah.
So what has happened is everybody wants this, and these patients that want it are not diabetics. And so that's a whole nother thing that we can talk about. But um, they're like, well, how do I get it? Well, they can't get it. So what they do is they go through these compounding pharmacies. Now, again, because it's not really truly um, made, the FDA did not approve it specifically for weight loss yet. Well, they did approve Ozempic, but like another one is like trizepatide, and that one hits both of your receptors. So that's a GLP receptor, but it hits both of them. So technically, it's supposed to work faster and basically be doable as strong as Ozempic and everything, but anyway, I got sidetracked. Sorry.
Oh, no, no,
Anyway,
no.
but that kind of has cascaded into this, epidemic people are talking about people getting it. Now, it's totally safe if you get it from, again, a reputable person, a reputable pharmacy. And the reason why compounding pharmacies are able to do this legally right now is they can't infringe on the patent. So they can't say, I'm giving you Ozempic, and
Yeah.
they can't infringe on Majaro's patent. So they can't say, I'm giving you Majoro. The other two things in those patents are the auto injector pens.
Oh, yeah.
That's a patent, so that cannot be infringed on. So you're hearing about people getting sued because they're advertising that they're giving you Ozempic or they're giving you Majoro, and then they're coming up with their own auto injector pens, and then that infringes on the patent. So it's kind of like confusing when people are like, how do you get it? How do you get it? Well, I'm not giving you Ozempic, I'm giving you semaglutide,
Hmm.
which is the generic name of it. And it's in a vial that you have to draw up. The same way that you draw up your CJC1295 is the same way that you're going to draw up your Ozempic. And it's
Okay.
dosed in units or not Ozempic, semaglutide, sorry.
Yeah.
It's going to be, dosed that way. And same thing with the Majoro. The other interesting thing is people are like, well, are these compounding pharmacies regulated? Yes and no. So
Mm.
peptides like the CJC, ipamorelin, ibutamoren, all of those that we talked about, and we haven't talked about like BPC 157, all of those are not regulated right now.
Mhm.
But in times of supply and demand, compounding pharmacies have approval and have FDA regulations they have to meet to give you semaglutide and trizepatide.
Okay.
So it's interesting. And I called our pharmacist because I was concerned about this. And I was like, okay, well, how do I know the product you're giving me and my patients isn't fake? And they basically were like, because we have to meet FDA criteria for this, and we have to not infringe on the patent. So they are not going to give auto injector pens. They're not going to market it as Ozempic, and stuff like that. So they do have to be met. But that being said, those are the large compounding pharmacies that you have, like Olympia, you've got Empower, you've got Hollandale, you've got all of those. Those are the big ones. Where patients are getting into trouble are if they're going to like smaller mom and pop med spas, people who are, your local pharmacy down the street that's like, I'm going to figure out, how to compound it, because it's basically this chain of amino acids.
Mhm.
So there is a bunch of trial, and error,
Yeah.
or not trial and error. There is a bunch of non-regulated things that people can do, and they can, patent it. But if you go through a big pharmacy, you're going to have a very, very low likelihood of that happening, because the pharmacies have to be in guidance with the FDA.
Gotcha. Okay. And so with the Ozempic slash semaglutide, that world, well, one, and correct me if I'm wrong, usually like a drug has to be on the market for about 7 years before it can be allowed to get the generic, right? Something like that.
I believe, I'm not sure,
Okay.
as far as that, but to be officially like FDA approved, it's an extremely lengthy process, to do that. So they have been working on this for a long time, to get the actual Ozempic approved. But I actually don't know off the top of my head how long it has to be for the brand or generic. I'm not sure.
Okay. Because I was about to say, man, I hadn't heard of Ozempic for a 7 year period. I was like,
Yeah,
Ozempic seems fairly new, like a few years, if
it
that.
is. It
Yeah.
is. But I mean, there's so many things that are in trials for so long. You just don't, you just don't hear about them.
Yeah.
And then obviously there's different criteria when they're doing the research. Like if they find like groundbreaking evidence about these like clinical trials, they can push them through.
Gotcha. And it sounds like Ozempic was one of
Yeah,
those.
correct.
And you had mentioned, I hadn't thought about it like this, but you had mentioned at first where you're talking about Ozempic and what it does, and it was like, okay, hey, it helped with the diabetics because it helped lower, help keep their sugars in control. But then it also helped keep the ghrelin response pretty low, which meant the cascade effect was
Yeah.
actually pretty interesting. I didn't ever put that part together
Yeah.
where next they're losing weight, but because they're losing weight, so their cholesterol is also, that's actually pretty impressive. And I
Yeah.
remember when I first started hearing about Ozempic, I was like, yeah, no, I'm the person that's all, I'm gonna lean towards don't do it first.
I am too, 100%. Like
I'm
very
super skeptical,
skeptical of it. Yeah. Yeah.
super skeptical.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, man, like this stuff is actually like working,
Yeah.
and it's like the negative parts are nowhere near as massive as the benefits. Again, risk reward, like high risk, high reward, low risk with Ozempic from what I'm seeing. Would you agree with that?
So yes and no. So yeah, so you've got Ozempic, semaglutide, and then the other one is the GLP-IP, which is trizepatide. That's the double dually as strong kind of one.
Yeah.
And then the generic name of Majoro is trizepatide. So yes and no. So because there always are risks, right? We have to like go over that. The risk of it, and I'm very clear with my patients, like if you are taking Ozempic, you are paying cash for it or out of pocket because your insurance isn't covering it, which means that you're not a diabetic.
Yeah.
You have to make sure you're eating because you are not a diabetic. So you're going to be having insulin and glucose levels. And now you're taking a drug that inhibits this. So there's a very big problem with hypoglycemia. And what do yo-yo dieters tend to do? They go through these periods where they're used to starving themselves.
Yep.
And becoming very malnourished and having all of the symptoms of malnourishment, but they're losing weight. So these people that want this drug, they're lifetime dieters, and I have to kind of every single day keep having the same conversations with people. Like, you have to eat because you're going to get sick on this. You're going to, definitely get brain fog. Indigestion across the board is probably the biggest one that both people, both drugs can cause nausea, everything like that, but it slows down everything. So you're going to have constipation. You're going to have all of that stuff, because you're slowing your GI system down. So there are definitely risks with that. The other thing is we don't know this has not been around for a long
Sure.
time.
Yeah.
We don't know. I don't know what it's going to do in, 20 years for someone
Yeah.
who's on this. I don't know. We
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
Do you know that there's an increase in thyroid issues? So anyone who has like a thyroid cancer or thyroid nodules or anything like that, absolutely 100% should not be on this.
Gotcha.
So that is definitely one of the big things.
Okay. And so I didn't do it, but I'm glad you did, where you separated the two.
Yep.
Where it's like there's the population that are taking it that are diabetics, and then there's a population for weight loss, and they will have different experiences because
Yep.
of their individual needs. And so what you had mentioned about the dieters, or the population that's going to be using it for specifically weight loss, is really important. For one, I would, first of all, everybody, I think if you're going to be doing some kind of recomposition, you probably should just get a coach of some sort.
Absolutely.
I would love for people to come to me, but I think, like, look, go
Yeah.
find you a coach that works well with you, because with weight loss, like you said, they're seeing the results, the weight is dropping, but
Yeah.
they're coming across malnourished. Why? Because of, like you said, that yo-yo diet effect. When people go through a weight loss program on their own, they tend to just cut out everything. They're
Yeah.
just like, I had a grilled chicken salad and, some egg whites. That's not proper nourishment. Like,
Yeah.
you're a 200-pound man. You need more than that. Like, how are you still awake right now, bro? I'm tired for you.
Yeah.
And so it's really important. And, when you're going through that weight loss, like, and then when you're going through weight loss in general, your food selection should be very efficient, in terms of, like, you're picking food items that give you the biggest bang for your buck. You want maximum protein, maximum micronutrients, as much as you can in all of the food, so that you can eat less amounts of food, but still get as much nutrition as you can. But it sounds like with taking these peptides specifically, you have to be exceptionally aware of what you're consuming, because, like you said, you're slowing down your GI tract, which could lead to constipation. So that means now you really need to be focusing on hydration and fiber intake.
Totally.
But most people that go on to some form of a weight loss program, they're probably drinking a lot of water, but they've cut out so much stuff, and they're taking so much protein in, they're probably putting themselves definitely at risk of that, because they're not getting the fiber content that they need. And then hypoglycemic, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh yeah, because it's messing with how you deal with sugar. So that is one thing that a lot of yo-yo dieters do. They just cut out carbs. And so now your sugar levels are even lower. That's an interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. That's super important.
Yeah. And when I have people start, whether they start semaglutide or they start tirzepatide, it's kind of goofy, but it's a sheet that I give them, because these are like, and a lot of this has been trial and error by, me just getting more and more patients, but also going through with the medical community and researching this together, and, going on blogs and learning about what is working and what is not working. So this sheet is really kind of goofy, but it's like, you can't cut out carbs. So if you're one of those people that are used to doing these, crazy, like Atkins kind of diet things, you cannot do that on this medication, because you have to have some sort of carbohydrate in there, because you're not a diabetic. You're going to be hitting those receptors, and you have to do that, or you're going to feel awful, weak, exhausted, shaky, fatigued, hangry, like you're going to feel all that. So you have to do that. And then, because we're acting on, like, you don't feel like eating, some people literally have to set alarms on their phone, like every 4 hours, small, frequent meals. So it's so opposite of what people on these typical diets do, because they're like, well, I do intermittent fasting. You can't do that on this.
Yeah.
You can't do this. You can't sit down and eat a 1,500 calorie meal, because you're going to be full and you're going to feel sick if you do on this medication. So it's a lot of, like, coaching with these people. And it's not a one, and you hit it on the head, Chris, too. Like, it's not a magic pill. Like,
Yeah.
you still have to do the exercise part. You still have to do all of that. Like, this is not something, this is a lifestyle change, and it's to kind of jumpstart that process.
Yeah.
This is not like, I take this and I can go eat, donuts every day.
It's definitely helpful. And from what I'm seeing and hearing, like man, this is like having an amazing assistant next to you that's doing a lot of your work, but you still have to show up to work yourself.
Absolutely.
And if I remember right, even on the box of Ozempic, it says this product works with proper diet and exercise. So even for the diabetics that's taking this, is still saying, hey, bruh, hey, ma'am, you need to still get off the couch. Like, I'm not here to solve all your problems. I'm just going to help you a lot.
Yeah.
The other risk, you had kind of alluded to this, is man, the price point of these compounds outside of insurance is high. It's like 4 digits.
Yeah. So, I am not sure how there's patients, and there are people that I know that are getting actual patented Ozempic and Majoro. I am not sure where they're getting it or how they're getting it. But I do know of them, and personally, I know a few of them. And they're paying for Majoro's more expensive. So that trizepatide is more expensive because it's a double receptor. The trizepatide, if you would go to a pharmacy and get it and pay for it out of pocket, is anywhere from $1,100 to $1,500 a month. Yeah,
that's some people's mortgage.
Yeah, it's 100% most people's, and it's insane. And that's just a month. That is just a month dose. I think the Ozempic semaglutide is, I think, around like 1,000 out of pocket. So, I mean, I charge around like $450, $425 for the trizepatide. And then for the semaglutide, it's around $325. So it's not cheap. Even like through a compounding pharmacy with a legitimate product. Like, there's product that you can find online again, but this has become such a craze that you have to make sure you're getting the right thing, because there have been patients, and I have unfortunately seen them, where they're taking this and it's like fillers and their electrolytes are all off and everything's all off. And then you start talking to them, they're like, well, I got it through the mail. And I got it I think it's from Mexico, or I got it from some website online. I didn't have to talk to anybody. Well, it's probably not legit, and I mean, my product comes through the mail too, but it comes from an actual pharmacy. So, you just have to, again, like the peptides thing, you gotta be careful with it, and everything like that. The other thing is like, if there's young women listening on this, be really careful with fertility, because we don't have any data on if you're on this and you would get pregnant. We don't have any data on what it would do for a fetus. And then the other thing is there have been actual studies now that have been confirmed that when you're up titrating, specifically when you're up titrating in trizepatide, which is the Majoro, or the semaglutide, which is the Ozempic, your birth control methods are going to be less effective. So if you're on, for example, birth control, the oral pill, not like IVs, stuff like that, but if you're on oral birth control, you are supposed to use a backup method when you're escalating these doses.
Gotcha. That is good to know, because I'm curious now. I'm gonna go. I know a handful of females that are on some variation of these, and I'm curious if they were given that information, and or more importantly, do they remember that they were given that information? Because they probably were. It was probably mentioned, but they probably glossed over it. But that's huge, because I mean, again, that's a life altering event.
Oh, 100%. And
forever.
Yeah, and then for the women who don't know that they're pregnant, like we have no data on what this is going to do
Yeah,
to a fetus, or like breastfeeding. I don't give it to any women who are actively seeking to get,
correct.
pregnant or trying, and I don't give it to any women who are postpartum and still breastfeeding because we don't know.
Yeah, that's not even a gray area. It's just unknown completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's again, like you said, that's huge to understand. Risk reward, looking into it, and these are the things that you don't get that information just by buying it online from some random place. And that's probably a good sign that you shouldn't be buying it if you didn't get the warnings that are associated with it. If you're not talking to a person who didn't ask you your lifestyle questions, you probably don't need to buy from wherever you're getting it from. That probably is a massive red flag of you're not about to get something legit,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially like you had mentioned, even the price points of these things. Like if the price points are just too good to be true, you need to run, because like you, I know a maybe like four people ish that I can think of off the top of my head that they have access to the brand names of these items, and
Yeah.
they're selling it, but because they're the brand ones, the prices actually go up,
Yeah.
more often than not,
Yeah.
from that 1,000 to maybe I've heard 14, 1,500. And
Yeah.
I'm granted, when I hear that, I'm like, man, like a gym membership, and
Oh,
it's not
yeah.
much.
No, it's
Ah,
crazy. And like, I mean, even, I mean, when I talk to my patients about it, I'm like, I understand this is a huge, commitment financially too, because $400 a month, like, let's be honest, that's not something that people can take lightly.
no,
And so that's important that, I am very well aware of the sacrifices that my clients are making. And I want to make sure that they, one, are safe, two, they have good product, three, they're getting all the information, because that is a huge financial commitment to them, for
absolutely.
them.
Absolutely. Like, that's an additional car payment,
Yeah.
and a decent car at that. And, it's, to me, it's one of those things, like if you make that commitment to go that route, that means you should also have already been or prepared to make the commitment to change your eating habits, and not
Yeah.
just for the sake of like a quick 30-pound drop or whatever your goal is, but like a entire lifestyle
Yeah.
overhaul, and to include movement, whether some forms of exercise, is huge. But I will say a lot of the people that I've heard of that are taking this outside of the diabetics, most of them are taking this and they have not made any changes to their lifestyle. They're still seeing some weight loss.
Yep.
The product works, but they're taking it and they're like, I'm losing weight, but it's not as fast as I thought. Well, yeah, because now you're just like you haven't changed anything else. You're
Yeah.
still in a calorie surplus. You're not moving. You've not dealt with the basics yet. So
Yeah.
these things work. You have to work with it, though.
Yeah.
Uh,
Absolutely. And
yeah,
the biggest thing too is a lot of people will hit this plateau, and I have to explain to them, like, from your, metabolic and just kind of your body composition, you can only lose so much weight so quickly. So
yep,
people are like, oh, well, it worked great. I lost all this weight and now it's not working. Well, okay, well, your body, you could, like, try to be patient.
yep.
Especially women, I'm like, just try to be patient, see. And then I start talking to them and I'm like, well, are you eating? And they're like, oh, yeah, I'm eating. I'm like, okay, well, send me what you're eating. And then, like you said, like, an egg white and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, well, your body isn't going to lose any more weight because your body has just slowed its metabolism down to conserve, because you're on this medication, it's losing weight, and then it's just this big
Yeah.
thing. So
So many parts that are being affected because, like you said, the compound slowing down the metabolism, but
yeah,
your weight loss is slowing down your
yes,
metabolism. If you did this in a a poor fashion, then you may have lost muscle mass. So now your metabolism is slowing down even more.
Yeah.
And then on top of you just not eating, and if you haven't changed the lifestyle issues, like all of those things, yeah, you're going to hit that plateau.
Every single person responds differently to this medication, like every single one. It's, something that we are going to get data on as a medical community and kind of go from there. But it is something definitely that, and it's going to be approved by the FDA for weight loss for sure. I know trizepatide Ozempic is, I think if it either has or it's about to be, and the trizepatide or the Majoro, it's going to be approved. It's just a matter of when. But we, again, just because something's approved, we need to get long-term data, and we just don't have it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's good. That's man. Let's see. You just, oh man, brain fart. We were talking about the lack of.
Do you want to jump on the testosterone quick?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do testosterone. TRT, or testosterone replacement therapy. I know for the guy world, like, man, that is the new rave. Even some people will say they're on TRT and they're just taking some stuff that they got from the dude that they bought out of the trunk, but they're like, oh, TRT. It kind of validates some people, but legitimate TRT is become very important. I think a lot of that is there's more information out there that is showing the impacts and the benefits of testosterone just in people, because men and women both need some.
Absolutely.
But I think we finally got kicked in the stomach when we saw what testosterone levels are in the typical man now. And we're like, oh my God. The numbers are low. I will say for myself, the medical literature for the low test is what, 250, right? That's the bottom side of it.
It's 150.
It's 150?
It's 150. That's usually the typical. I know the military cuts it at 150. That's where they start to, most of my clients are military, and they cut it at that they start talking about it with them at around 150.
And that's ridiculous. When I finally got on it, I was still way lower than that. 150 is nothing, especially when you consider the top end is about 1,000. So one of my gripes is that's not a range at that point. 150 to 1,000, that's all of the numbers, legitimately, like at that point, you only have 149 options of low. And most guys are not gonna, without the aid of taking some stuff, they're not going over 1,000. Most guys aren't even going over 700, just naturally. I talked to a 24-year-old and his numbers were, or 23, and his numbers were like 5 something. I'm like, bro, you just got testosterone. Like, you are a baby right now. Your numbers should be prime. But so we're really starting to see the effects of testosterone in men, the behavioral health, the muscle mass, the energy, the drive, that aggression towards life, and not like just going to a bar fight, but just that I'm going to seize the day type of mentality. And I think if you took a macro view of this country, you just see that everywhere. Just the country is just like oozing those kinds of things. I'm always tired by like 10 a.m. I didn't sleep well. I didn't recover. I want sex maybe once or twice a week, but that's about it. My little guy downstairs works every once in a while. What are some of the things that when you're getting a patient that they're coming in, what are some of the things that you're looking for as the perfect candidate, outside of obviously the numbers, but the perfect candidate for TRT?
That's a good question, because it's used for so many different things now. The person that I think as the perfect is the guy who's 50, who really has been, kind of struggling. They're done with their reproductive. They have, they're either they don't want to have children or they have children. They just feel fatigued all the time. They feel kind of tired. They, have been an active person their whole life. Maybe they've done sports, or they're just a very fit individual, healthy lifestyle. And they just kind of feel a little down in the dumps.
Mhm.
There's definitely like a depression aspect and a mental health aspect that you touched on that's huge. And motivation. And a lot of them are very type A. They really want to, do everything to the top tier that
Yeah.
they can. Those to me, and they, maybe want to spend a little bit more time with their partner now that their kids are out of the house or they're grown, or, they don't have kids, or they're successful, or they've hit their professional milestones and they want to focus more on the relationships and stuff like that. That's somebody that in my mind is like a perfect candidate for that.
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah. And
so
man,
yeah,
that when you paint that picture, it really puts things into perspective because I mean, you easily could have just said a guy with low test. You could have left out the age. You could have left
yeah,
out the activity level. I think when I hear you say that, I was like, okay, that makes so much sense because if you're younger, then it's like that shouldn't be your first resort. Like, hey,
no,
make sure the rest of the things in your life are in check first. Stress, sleep, eating, activity level. I overheard a guy. He was he was overweight, and he was like, "Yeah, they got me on TRT," and I'm like, "What's your?" I didn't ask him, but my thought was, what was his doctor's weight loss plan? What was his doctor's plan for him to like getting out and doing things, being more active? Because that could help with his testosterone levels as well. Let's go more into like some of the risks for low testosterone. What are some of those risks that people should see? A lot of I know when you talk about testosterone, especially in the gym space, people only think muscle, sex,
yeah,
guy. That's it. No, they don't even use other words. There's no punctuation. It's just
yeah,
muscle, sex, man.
yeah.
But what else are people either losing out on when their test is or testosterone is low?
So big thing is obviously like we talked about before that you said the drive, kind of the motivation.
Mhm.
The other thing that we think about is, yeah, okay, your sex life, all that stuff, but you also have like as you age, your test is going to go down. For women, especially, it's going to be really important with their bones and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Like you see a lot of more health benefits from that. The biggest thing that I see in men is mental health. I
Mm,
mean, yes, physically aside, like, yes, there are physical, ailments or whatever, but the biggest thing is if you can get somebody to physically feel better and mentally feel better and provide them with the ability to have that drive, and get them to a gym and get them to someone like you, Chris, who can work with them and they can start to see those results and feel
mm,
that difference. To me, that's bigger than anything because you're going to hit on the mental aspect of it and then you're going to hit on the physical aspect of it. And so for me, that's the biggest driving factor for me to give somebody TRT or for me to kind of talk to someone about TRT, because it is a cascade of events.
yeah.
And, I have put overweight men on TRT before in an effort to get them into the gym, to give
Yep.
them drive to go to the gym, not just sit at home and be on TRT. That's not the people I'm talking about. It's about getting them to feel the energy to go to the gym. Then when they go to the gym, they start seeing some results a little bit more because they have normal, levels, maybe getting more engaged with other activities at the gym or community members and stuff like that. And I mean, it's really hard because a lot of people, especially since COVID, gyms have been closed, people are working from home, you know, the socialization isn't there. And so I feel
Yeah.
like that is why I've used TRT in an adjunctive therapy with weight loss and diet and exercise
Yeah.
for that purpose.
Yeah. And so I man, what you just said, like that's what my 2021 was just like,
Yeah.
I knew something was wrong because like getting off of the couch mentally was work.
Yes.
It was
Yeah.
so, oh man, it was taxing. I had an issue with just at the time I was still military, and I was like, hey, look, I need to get my blood work done, and they were like, no. Um, would you say that right now the medical community is still a little bit lagging, or are they starting to catch up? Yeah.
They're really behind. They're really, really behind. And I was very skeptical when I had patients come in. They're like, "Oh, I'm on testosterone, or I'm on this." About it. But after meeting with these people, both men and women, it's been so eye-opening how this has changed their life,
Yeah.
how they have really done, really, really well with it. And some people, it hasn't. I mean, it's not a magic thing. Some people,
Right.
it's just not the right, for whatever reason. I don't know if it's mental, I don't know if it's physical. It doesn't really do anything.
Yeah.
But I would have to say that way overwhelming majority is like, this is really, help me.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are like, oh, well, you really don't need it, but you really do. And I think that they don't take into account that holistic kind of, they just look at the TRT and they look at like the medical aspect of it and the numbers and all this, but they miss that whole other thing. Oh yeah, they're way undershooting. Like, I know that the VA won't provide it, or at least they weren't at the time, unless somebody was like less than 150.
Yeah.
And then I've had patients come to me with less than 150, 70.
Yeah.
And the VA will give them like, they'll dose them, but they dose them like totally inappropriately. They'll give them like, there's, uh, they'll be like, oh, okay, take like, 50 milligrams a week. And you're like, but that's like, but
Yeah.
what? Like, that's not going to do anything. Like, it's
All
not
right.
going to
So
do
good.
anything.
Now I made it to 150. Great.
Well, no, or like what they do, which even makes me more angry, is will give them an injection. So a lot of my older guys that go to the VA,
Mhm.
they'll come in and get their injections done. Okay. And then they're like, oh yeah, they gave me like, 35 milligrams or 50 milligrams. And then every month I come back and I'm like, wait a minute. So you're taking like 50 at one time or 100 at one time for a month. So you're getting this like surge, and then
Yeah.
you're just
Oh
crashing.
my gosh. Because like depending on the ester, the half-life is still only like,
Yeah.
on the fast end, like
Yeah.
4 or 5 days, and on the long end, maybe 10.
Yeah, and that's why I don't like, for like women or men, the pellets. I don't like pellets.
I was gonna ask about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like them.
You can't regulate the
Oh yeah,
dosage.
and if you get them in and you don't like them,
Tough break. Yeah.
tough cookies. Like so you can get them out, but not as easily. So I like it that what I'm doing is able to adjust the dose with them. How are you feeling, kind of, and go from there, and then cause like a steady kind of increase like this instead of something like this.
Peaks and valleys.
That's gonna, and especially women, the pellets, most women are gonna get them like, perimenopause or postmenopause.
Mhm.
And then it's like, they're all over the place. That they're like,
It's not even
my
one
husband
line
hates me.
anymore.
My husband hates me. I'm yelling at everybody. I'm freaking out on the lady at the car wash. And I'm like,
Oh my
okay.
God. Yeah. Yeah, no, I get that part. I told my parents maybe a month ago. I was like, yeah, started TRT, da da da. And they're like, what is that? And I told them, they're like, the doctors gave you steroids. Yes, Mom. Yeah,
Yeah.
dots. I'm not doing this. Yes, I'm taking it. But, they realize the profession that I'm in, and, I
Yeah.
like to learn. So they were open, and it was interesting because they were like, well, why would your test be low? And I was like, oh my God, how much time do we have? You know, um,
Yeah.
all of the reasons. A lot of people don't even realize how much of our day-to-day life is negatively impacting our testosterone, from the foods we eat to the amount of stress we're holding. The world we live in now is so much faster paced than it was, like,
Yeah.
50 years ago. And there's so much more demand in terms of, like, get this done now. Stress
Yeah.
levels are higher than ever, and people aren't sleeping nearly enough. I think the average American's getting like just under 6 hours of sleep, where the average American needs just about 8.5 hours.
Yeah.
If you get a person and they're on TRT, because you had mentioned, hey, it's not just take TRT and sit on the couch. Are you giving additional advice? Are you like, hey, you're going to take this, but you also, like, what recommendations are you giving to people after they get their TRT?
Basically, kind of the same thing that you were saying. I mean, okay, you're going to start the TRT. What
Hmm.
I would recommend is you start exercising, you start doing all of that. You also, follow up with me, obviously labs. Like, um, the other thing that I also tell patients is some patients will be like, oh, I feel great, and they'll just start self-dosing. That's the other thing I have to tell them, would be like, no, 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 like, if you want to talk about your dose, then like call me, we can discuss it. But that's one of the big things that I've seen. Like all of a sudden I'm prescribing somebody, 30 milligrams, 3 times a week. And all of a sudden they're taking 50 milligrams 3 times a week. Well, now you doubled your total, your total dose. And there are risks to it. And there are people that I'm like, no, like, I'm not going to give you TRT. And that is something that we have to talk about. But as far as those people, I usually, the people that take it, again, it's like a broken record: healthy diet, exercise, lifestyle, sleep, all the things, yada, yada, yada.
What are, like, some of those negative side effects or that come once that dosages start to change or get too high? What are some things that people should be mindful of?
Yeah. So, similar to like what we were talking about, like the growth hormone and the peptides, my first question to them is, do you have any tumors? Do you have anything like that? Do you have any history of any of that? Obviously. And then more specific towards the TRT is, blood work is something that you have to do. And if you don't do it, then, I will stop prescribing to you, because TRT can make your blood thicker, which is a term called like hypercoagulability, um, hemochromatosis, stuff like that. So it can make your iron levels higher, everything like that. When that happens, you're more at an increased risk for heart attack, blood clots.
Yeah.
Um, Also, something I don't do for anybody is if they have a history of a blood clot, provoked or unprovoked. Now, what that means is, if you were in the hospital and you had a central line that I put in your neck when you're in the ICU and you get a blood clot there from your central line, that would be a provoked. That's something that we did and your body clotted around it and you got a clot. An unprovoked would be, you have no history, you did not take a long flight around the world, and you had a blood clot in your lung just randomly.
Yeah.
That's somebody that I won't do TRT on, just because we don't, know how everybody's body's going to respond. And that's the point of getting lab work, is to make sure that we're following that. Just like the cholesterol, that's the other thing that we have to look at and make sure your cholesterol levels are okay. Everything like that. If you're just blasting through and you're blasting and pushing the testosterone levels higher than they should be, really, you said at the very beginning, like, you're not going to get much more benefit after around like 1,000. If I push you to 2,500, you're really not going to, scientifically, you're not going to really get much more of a benefit from that. the one thing that I really worry about is hypercoagulability. For older men, the other thing that can happen is you can get elevated prostate-specific antigens, which puts you at risk for getting benign prostatic hypertrophy, which means you get an enlarged prostate.
Mhm.
And if you get an enlarged prostate, there's issues that come with that, but it happens to men as they get older. That
Yeah.
just happens. You get BPH, you can't pee. So you're constantly like not being able to empty your bladder fully. So you're constantly going to the bathroom. That's why old guys go to the bathroom every like 25
Yeah.
minutes.
Yep.
Yeah. Because they can't empty their bladder fully. So technically TRT, that is a risk factor with TRT.
Interesting.
And then with younger men, if you are on TRT and you want to be, you really want to have kids someday, you're giving your body basically a reason to be lazy. If you want to think of that, like, so now if I give you TRT, let's say your levels are like 300. Okay. They're not that low, but I don't know, they're 350. Okay. And you're like a 50-year-old guy. That's like probably about the norm for somebody around that age. Now, obviously now if you're 300 and you're 24, that's not, the norm. So you have to take that into account. But if you're 24 years old and, you start TRT, you want to have a child, you're augmenting your body with a product. So your body's going to become lazy and it's going to shut down your own testosterone production.
Yep.
So when it does that, you're going to decrease the amount of basically spermagenesis. And so you have to worry about that. And we do have to have conversations with that about, like, hey, you've been on TRT. Usually I say if they've been on TRT for around 3 months, then I start to have the conversation of, do you want to have kids? If you do, it might not be a bad idea to do like ganadorelin or something to kind of help that spermagenesis happen.
Gotcha.
And then guys that are like on the borderline, like the guys that I were talking about who, I don't know, they're, 35 and let's say their test levels come back at like, I don't know, 450.
Mm-hmm.
A really good thing to augment with them is something called like enclomiphene, where it's going to act as those peptides that we talked about, and it's going to basically tell your body to produce more testosterone, but it's not supplementing it. Your body's making it. It just like puts it kind of in an overdrive. So like bodybuilders, after they go through like a blast cycle where they will escalate with their tests, when they come down off that cycle, I will start them on the enclomiphene to
get their natural levels going again.
Yeah, to like jumpstart it.
Is there a target number that you try to get them to, or are you looking more for a specific number, or are you aiming for like maybe a less tangible or less quantifiable number, like maybe lifestyle improvement? What is your goal as a provider?
My goal is for people, and I have guys come to me and their testosterone is literally like 600 and they're like, oh, well, like, but I feel so awful. What I'll do would be like, okay, well, that's why this is so patient, specific, because everybody's dose is so different. Nobody's on the same amount because it depends on your blood work and stuff like that. So my goal is to have patients between 900 and 1200. And that there's not like a scientific, reason, but really once you get over 1500, you're not really going to get much more benefit, and your blood work looks okay, and they are fine, then that's kind of my goal for them.
Blood work tells a massive story, and then you can make a proper, or at least a better decision from there. I do think it's interesting. Something that keeps coming up is a lot of guys don't realize that they can request to just get their labs done. And I was in the same spot until I just was like, no, something's wrong. But most guys don't realize, well, I thought I just had to wait for a doctor to do it. But I tried to explain to this one young guy, and I told him, it's like, if you waited for somebody to tell you get your blood work done, when would you get your blood work done?
Yeah.
Probably at the very earliest, what, till you're maybe 40, maybe,
Yeah.
if probably a little bit later, depends on how diligent you are about getting your regular exams and stuff. But again, and this sucks for most guys. Most guys do not go to a doctor's
No.
optimization, but
Yeah.
it is where we're at. And just trying to get people to understand, like, hey,
Yeah.
first of all, getting your regular exams is huge. It
Yeah.
can make a huge difference. And having that blood work tells an amazing story. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Where can people find you at if they want to get a hold of you for services, benefit that you have? Where can they find you?
Yeah. So I actually am just almost done with my website. So they can do KCH intensivistnp.com, or you can email me at KHORNER at kchintensivistnp.com, or you can ask Chris and he can give you my number.
Yep. Yep. And we'll go that route.
Chris, thank you so much. And thank you for doing this. I've never done a podcast before, but thank you for doing this to make sure that people get good information and, know everything and know that it's not a one size fits all. It's not a one pill or one injection. It's like a full lifestyle thing.
Yeah.
And that we need people, on your end and in the medical community and the dietetics community, physical fitness industry, PT. We need everybody because we as a society are really really lacking. And there's this really exciting stuff going on with especially the peptides and the SARMs in the medical community. And there's so many really awesome looking benefits that we are going to be hearing about down the road. This is going to be, I think the peptides are going to be ginormous with what that they can offer. And we just need people to kind of start learning about it, getting on board with it, especially my people in the medical world who are super skeptical. And I was one of them.